It may be mid-February, but now is a really good time to start sowing some of your seeds. Now, don't be in a rush to sow all your warmth-loving seeds. You're just going to end up with problems. One of the only seeds that I sow between December and the beginning of Feb is my chilies, and that is it. I do not sow anything else that likes a little bit of warmth. And then it's only because I have the heat and the grow lights to carry on growing these seeds. Because there is no point in trying to grow anything indoors on a sunny windowsill. Because at this time of year, the light that's coming in is going to create massively long leggy plants. As an example, these are my sweet peas that I sowed a couple of weeks ago. And as you can see, it's got a lot of growth, but it's got a massive amount of legginess. And this is something that you want to avoid. This is just 3 to 4 days without the grow light being on. They were sown and forgotten, and I forgot to put them on the grow light. The only light that these had was a south-facing window. And as you can see, it's just nowhere near enough. But today I'm going to discuss some of the things that we can sow under cover outside. All these seeds will germinate better being brought into the house with a little bit of warmth, just the warmth from a room, be it a conservatory or another area of your house. But once they have germinated, you can bring them quite happily under cover, be it a greenhouse, cold frame or polytunnel, down into your growing space. And they'll happily grow along in these cooler temperatures that we have in February. Now, you do not have to start sowing in February if you do not want to. Most of the stuff that you can sow in February, you can sow in March and even April. To be honest, most of the things that you will sow in February, if you do a later sowing in March or even April, they will probably be the same size. But there is certain benefits for us. It's to spread out our sowing season. For us, we sow and plant a lot of plants here on our allotment. If I can sow all these over several months, it's less of a burden on me in the months of March and April, where it really starts getting incredibly busy for sowings and plantings. But today, my main focus is on about 13 different sowings that you can start at this time of year. From now, which is the middle of February, to the end of February, these are good ones to get started and won't need extra heat from a heat mat or anything like that. So you can really cut costs down. Now, my first one is spinach. We love spinach and we're actually trying some new ones this year. Now, spinach we like to get in early because if it starts growing through the hotter months, it is really prone to bolt. Now, there is certain seeds that you can buy that are more bolt resistant, but I find an earlier sowing for spinach and a late summer sowing for spinach will give me healthy crops throughout the whole of the year. For me, with my spinach, I will multi-sow into cells, and once they get to a nice healthy height, I will then plant them up into my preferred area. I don't plant sun in really intense full sun. I keep this crop for slightly more dappled shade, and I keep that full sun position for more of the sun-loving crops. Now, spring onions is another great one to start at this time of year. We start sowing small amounts. They are very fast growing, and before you know it, you'll be harvesting some fresh spring onions. Spring onions are something that we successionally plant throughout the whole of the year, giving us a fresh crop so we don't overly sow spring onions. And it's the kind of vegetable that you can grow in between other plants. It really doesn't take up a lot of room. Another onion variety to grow at this time of year is your basic bulb onions. They love a really good head start. And they could be sown any time from the traditional Boxing Day up until the middle of next month. But the sooner you get those seeds growing, the better and the healthier they will be. If you're going to grow onions, don't leave it too late. You really need to get those seeds sown soon. Now, next we have kohlrabi. Kohlrabi is a beautiful vegetable. Sowing earlier in the year really reduces that bolting tendency that you can get on some varieties. So we always sow at the beginning of the year and towards late summer for a winter late crop. This year I'll be growing some later on in the year in our polytunnel, and hopefully I can get that to overwinter. Now the brilliant Florence fennel. Now I've struggled with Florence fennel to some degree. Now I've had some great crops in the past, but to get the whole lot of it to crop really well, I've struggled with, and I am looking for a really good variety and a seed to grow. We will be sowing it again this year to give it another go, and I'm going to pop it into a different bed this year. But again, Florence fennel is another great one to start early this year. Now another really easy crop to grow at this time of year is your lettuces, and there are plenty of varieties that will grow in cooler conditions. This year we're going to start off our little baby gem lettuces for either outdoors, which will be ready in several weeks from sowing, or in our polytunnel. I want to get certain crops growing that are quick to harvest before I start planting up the polytunnel with our main crops. Lettuces are something that you can grow in pots, containers, or in the ground. It really doesn't take up a lot of room. But be warned, slugs really do love them, so you need to be aware of this. Whether it's daily checking for slugs and snails, or if it's using some kind of slug traps or deterrents, it is definitely something to keep in mind when you're trying to grow lettuces. Now is also a good time. There are several varieties for early cabbages that you can start sowing at this time of year. Now for us, we sow into trays and then we prick out and then plant on into modules, letting them grow to a nice healthy size before we transplant them into our areas. There is so many different varieties of cabbages that you can grow in your allotment or your growing area, and there is plenty to choose from that taste absolutely fantastic. But make sure if you're starting cabbages at this time of year that it is a variety that you can grow early on and not for a later sowing. Now another thing you can start off at this time of year, and there is plenty of varieties to start sowing at this time of year, is your broccolis and your cauliflower. Now cauliflower for me is a little bit of my nemesis. We've had some fantastic crops over the year, but at this allotment we've seemed to have struggled a lot to grow our cauliflower with a nice good head. Sometimes it is just the variety that you're trying to grow, and some years when we've had a good crop it seems to be complete luck. And between the cauliflower and the broccoli, both again have their issues. Just like the brassicas, the cabbage white will really decimate a plant if you do not protect it. Now one of the things that we are growing for the first time this year is asparagus. Now we've been wanting to grow asparagus for the last several years here on our plot. Well, this year we think we finally got a bed just for asparagus. Now we could buy crowns. Crowns are a great way of growing asparagus. It makes it a lot easier and you can harvest within a few years. But with sowing asparagus seeds, you really do have to add on an extra year before you can start harvesting those spears. Now for us, we have bought some asparagus seeds. Now I've gone for the UC72 variety. I don't know much about certain varieties for asparagus, but this one is nice thick spears and apparently incredibly tasty. Now this packet's got 150 seeds. That's a lot of asparagus. Now we will sow all of these because we're going to have them in pots or maybe a nursery bed for the first year. And to be honest, with the amount of slugs that we had last year, I don't want to have to wait another year to start off my asparagus seeds. At this time of year, starting some of your herbs off, your coriander and your parsley is a great easy one to grow at this time of year. We grow a lot of coriander and parsley each year. And the great thing about these herbs, you can even grow them on your kitchen windowsill, giving you a constant supply of fresh herbs throughout the whole of the year. But maybe having a pot or two outside your back of your kitchen door, just so you can go and harvest whenever you need some fresh tasty herbs. Now my last two are broad beans and beetroots. My beetroots I really start towards the end of February. I don't like to do it too early because it just slows them down somewhat. But my broad beans, this is the really good time of year to start sowing them. Now there's certain varieties that do much better at this time of year for early sowing. And for us it will be the agedulce, or however you pronounce it, is the one that we'll be sowing early. Now, I'm not going to go crazy with our broad beans this year. Normally we do quite a large bed of broad beans, but I'm only going to plant probably about 20, maybe 30 plants, which sounds like a lot, but by the time you've podded those beans and taken off the tough rubbery textured skin, you don't actually get that many. It's another one that's very easy to grow and quite fun and good for kids to grow because the seed is so big. Now, all of these seeds I've mentioned are really, really easy to grow. There is nothing complicated about them, and they're great starter crops to actually start growing. But if the weather does get extremely cold and we start getting a lot of negative figures here in the UK, you really do need to cover with a bit of fleece or some added protection. Something like bubble wrap, fleece, or anything like that, maybe even a bit of wool around the base of the pots, can really help those seedlings along. But again, it's not a necessity to grow at this time of year. You can always wait. But for us, because we like successional planting, we like to start as early as what we can get away with and carry on throughout the whole of the year. So these are just a handful of easy suggestions for you to do. But is there anything that you've actually started growing now? Or maybe some more of the unusual vegetables and fruits that you can grow here in the UK? What have you started off already? If you are enjoying this kind of content and you find it useful, why don't you like and subscribe? Throughout this whole year, I am going to be introducing new crops, new ideas and new ways to grow throughout the whole growing year. We'll be sowing and growing more exotic type vegetables that we've never really grown before throughout the whole of this growing season. But let me know in the comments, guys, what you are looking forward to sowing and whether you're going to be starting this month or waiting for another month or two.